Hello, everybody. On behalf of the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria and Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, I don't know what to say, maybe everything. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. We have at this moment 14 time zones simultaneously on the screen, which cover more or less 57% of the planet. We are going to discuss solidarity as a bridge to happiness, to suggest solutions to cope and prevent COVID-type crisis. What happened to humanity? What went wrong? We wanted to reach God as fast as possible and in the simplest possible way, by building upwards, by promoting the universality of our 4 basic freedoms of movements of people, goods, services, and capitals, by building high skyscrapers with very narrow fundaments, like this one. I hope we shall see it on the screen. Where is my first skyscraper? Technically something goes wrong. Yes, this is the first skyscraper. Constructions are not sustainable, not resilient, not stable. But the good news is that there is nothing new under the sun. We have as examples the Tower of Babel, which was built according to the Bible some 5,000 years ago. And the UN building in New York, which was built almost 70 years ago. Our buildings are vulnerable because we are impatient. We're in a hurry to reach the sky as our limit. What is the solid construction? There are historical examples of solid constructions. For example, the tipi of the Native Americans is solid one because the fundament is much more solid than the height. We have the Inuit igloo. And we have also the Egyptian pyramids, in case of which the removal of 1 or 2 building blocks does not cause any damage to the construction. This is what we suggest, to build our society with better proportions between the height and the foundations, to upgrade the free movement of people, goods, services, and capitals with safety protocols aimed to preserving human health and lives. COVID-19 showed that the so-called cheap labor in China is not so cheap, but rather expensive, and we are paying the price now. COVID showed also that we need standardized best practices to address the emergency when it occurs. As politics, we would suggest reading and adopting the Health Shield Europe initiative, and we have 4 of its authors here today. We have Hans van Balen, Chang-Hui Shen, Milena Georgieva, and the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria. This is what we suggest as policies. But as pictures illustrating these policies, I would suggest the buildings like the following. The first one, which is rather futuristic, but with a solid foundation, which is proportional to its height, and one which is a realistic one, which is, has already been built and could be a symbol of what we want to do in the future. This is the thing which I believe depicts the ideal proportions of the ancient Greeks. Having said that, I would like to introduce Thorsten Geisler, head of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation office in Bulgaria, director of Konrad-Adenauer Rule of Law program in Southeast Europe, a personal contribution to promote democracy, a person with personal contribution to promote democracy in South and Eastern Europe, soldier of European duty and passionate Atlanticist who feels comfortable even out of the comfort zone of politics. He has been appointed 2nd term in Bulgaria. Thorsten, you have the floor. Thank you for your cooperation in this initiative.
Thank you very much, Salomon, for this kind introduction. It is good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you on behalf of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation today's online conference. I would, of course, like to thank our partner, the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria, and its president, Solomon Passi, for inviting us to co-organize this event and for their excellent cooperation. I'm pleased that 13 experts from 3 continents have joined us today and will take the virtual floor. Among them, Konrad-Adenauer Foundation's Global Health Advisor, Martina Kaiser. I would like to thank each of our panelists for their contribution to the success of this conference. Dear friends, our planet is currently confronted with 2 pandemics. One of them is the coronavirus pandemic. The other one is the disinformation pandemic around the coronavirus pandemic. The coronavirus can be fatal. Globally, it already cost more than 300,000 lives. The disinformation pandemic around the coronavirus pandemic can also be fatal. If people, for example, believe that the virus is harmless or doesn't even exist, if they ignore all the security regulations and get infected. This morning, I read in British newspapers that more than 25% of the British people believe that the coronavirus is a hoax. So we must fight both pandemics, and we must find strategies how to prevent or how to mitigate potential pandemics in the future. The fight against the coronavirus is underway. Highly qualified scientists work on the development of a therapy and/or a vaccine. In the meantime, and nobody knows how long this period will last, we have to live in a world in which our personal freedom is restricted, and our economy is faced with the biggest problems since World War II. In parallel, we will have to work on strategies how to prevent other pandemics in the future. I'm not an expert in this field, but I know that if we as humans do not change how we interact with wildlife, future pandemics will become very likely. Scientists say that 70% of emerging diseases in humans are of zoonotic origin, and nearly 1.7 million undiscovered viruses may exist in wildlife. In the global wildlife trade, worth billions of dollars, agricultural intensification, deforestation, and urbanization are bringing people closer to animals, giving their viruses more of what they need to infect us, opportunity. There's also speculation that the coronavirus was man-made, although I have never seen any evidence. However, even those who claim it was artificially created say it was set free by accident, not by intent. And this contains some good news. Because due to globalization, no one can use biological weapons anymore without taking the risk of inflicting deadly harm on his own country. But the 2 pandemics we are facing have a major difference. Maybe the fight against the coronavirus itself is the easier one, because it can be fought by scientists and governments based on facts. The fight against disinformation campaigns is probably much more complicated. We are, however, not dealing with a new phenomenon. Myths, conspiracy theories, and disinformation campaigns have had their place in every civilization. They have always been political weapons. And we know that today's disinformation is not disseminated only by idiots, the so-called COVIDiots, but also intentionally by people who want to undermine our democracy. But today and this is a major difference, while disinformation campaigns have always had their place in every civilization, today, with the help of the internet and social media, they travel and spread much faster. That makes them more dangerous. And they have become so numerous that more and more people find it hard to distinguish between facts and fiction, even people that are well educated and have some experience. This is why some of the old counter strategies are no longer very effective. One good news, however, is that psychologists are more and more able to explain how people become victims of disinformation and conspiracy. So we can refine the old counter strategies. And also we have access to the international and to social media. We can fight back. We must do this actively. Otherwise, we will lose the battle. But we should also not be mistaken. The fight against the coronavirus may come to a successful end, and I'm convinced it will come to a successful end sooner or later. The fight against disinformation campaigns will be a permanent one. So we have to be prepared. Well, let me thank you once again for participating in this online conference. Together with you, I'm looking forward to the following presentations. Thank you very much again to the Atlantic Club. Thank you to Solomon. This was your initiative. Thank you. I think it was a great idea.
Thank you, Torsten. Next time we shall be relying on the global network of Konrad-Adenauer Foundation to make it a 24 time zones conference.
That would be a great pleasure for me.
Now we move to the mayor of Taipei, who is video recorded. As you know, in Taipei, in Taiwan, Zoom is prohibited for governmental officials because this is an instrument for their huge neighbor to penetrate their networks. So we have the mayor of Taipei, Mayor Ko Wen-ji, recorded. He is a Taiwanese surgeon and independent politician. He was elected for the first time in 2014, re-elected in 2018, and I myself had an unforgettable meeting with him in 2017 in Taipei. I think he, as a surgeon and as a mayor and as independent politician, has the authority to bring Taiwan to the World Health Organization. Mayor Ko.
Thank you to the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria and the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation for assembling such a diverse group of speakers to ponder over the ongoing crisis as well as our post-COVID-19 future. Since the outbreak of COVID-19 in Wuhan, the number of confirmed patients worldwide has soared to more than 4 million as of May 11, 2020. Fortunately, Taiwan's rapid response has allowed the country to get ahead of the outbreak and avoid extreme lockdown measures that many countries now face. We only have 440 confirmed patients, and I believe that Taipei's progress may be a valuable reference for global epidemic prevention. Transparency is the bedrock of our COVID-19 strategy. It took us about 40 days to collect the epidemic prevention information and the resources from different departments of our administration and translate them into English for our sister cities. Our standard operating procedures include epidemic prevention strategy, implementation SOP, creative measures, and the advantages of Taiwan in fighting the virus. Through sharing our expertise and the best practices, this information provides the global community with a comprehensive picture of our successful experience in combating COVID-19. For example, one primary consideration of Taipei City's epidemic prevention strategies is to maintain the balance between epidemic prevention and economic prosperity. In the process of containing COVID-19, we try to minimize the impact of our epidemic prevention efforts on the economy. As a doctor by training, I know that factors matter, and open communication is an effective tool against the spread of disinformation. We send our key insights to cities that have connection with Taipei City on April 21st. The responses have been encouraging, including 31 cities from 14 countries, expressed their appreciation for receiving Taipei's epidemic prevention SOPs. Many of them asked for future collaboration, including video conferences and requests to join their platforms in dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. This is the beginning of Taipei's initiative to promote global collaboration. By offering our experience, we hope through our joint efforts, we are able to return our normal life and enjoy the economic prosperity in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Mirko. This is really an impressive know-how of the city of Taipei. And this was the first out of 4 interventions from Taiwan that we shall have today. Now we proceed with the opening of this Zoomference with Eric Weiner from the United States, Washington, D.C., author of Geography of Bliss, the New York Times bestseller, which was incorporated into the curriculum of a number of American schools and universities. Eric is a columnist for BBC Travel, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, National Public Radio. He is a journalist, scholar, author, explorer in a number of areas: geography, happiness, genius, wisdom, God. His books inspired the titles of our panels today. And now I move to Eric Weiner. Eric, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Solomon. And it's very nice to see everyone on this morning, afternoon, evening, as you say. You know, to be honest, when Solomon first invited me to give the remarks and to participate in this conference, I was flattered, but I was also a bit confused because I thought, well, I'm a writer who focuses on the happier aspects of the world, including literally global happiness, spiritual life, creative life, innovation, wisdom. And right now, the world does not seem at first glance like a very happy place. We're going through a once in a lifetime, perhaps once in a century crisis. But then the more I thought about it, I thought that, in fact, a lot of my work does touch upon the issues that we face. It really depends on how you look at it. So I just want to, in my opening remarks, present some different views, a more humanistic view about the challenges we face. Because yes, the COVID-19 presents at first and foremost a public health crisis, an economic crisis, a technological one to some extent, but really it is a human crisis and a philosophical crisis in a way. In one level, the coronavirus, the pandemic, is a stress test for societies. It's also a stress test for marriages, I can say, if you're spending a lot of time at home with your spouse. And it reveals underlying tensions, and it also reveals the good things about these relationships. And in studying in happy countries around the world, like say Iceland, for instance, I've noticed that one of the characteristics they have is a high level of trust, which is helpful not only in good times, but in bad times. So what I'm suggesting is the ingredients that make for a happy country also make for a resilient country during times of crisis like this. I also want to say a few words about perspective, about the future. It's easy to say that we have never been through anything like this before, and that may be true of the panelists, but it's not true of human beings. We have actually been through pandemics, obviously, in the past, and much worse ones. Since the time of Socrates in Athens and probably before, and humans have always survived this as a culture, as a species, and it's tempting to make broad predictions about what's going to happen in a post-COVID-19 world. And if you read some of the articles, you would think, well, we're all going to be having Zoom conferences like this. We'll never meet in person again. All education will be online, and there'll be all these changes. And I think there will be some changes, but we also may gain a greater appreciation for what we had all along, which is human-to-human contact, the ability to be in the same room, to shake hands, to hug each other. So I think we will see a growing appreciation of that. I also think from a humanistic point of view, the crisis is in fact very humbling. You know, in Athens of 400 BC, during the time of Pericles, when the plague hit, they attributed it to the gods, and they didn't necessarily think that this can't be happening to us. But today, in the day and age of these devices, the smartphones and everything, we've come to think that we are invincible as a species. And yet, if you think about it, this one little microbe, scientists can't even agree whether it's alive or not, has disrupted life completely. So I think it's a humbling experience, and I think that it hurts, but that can also present opportunities, because it's only when we're humble that we start to look at our assumptions and the way we've been doing things. This is an important and urgent crisis. That's why we're talking about it. That's why the media is paying attention to it. There are other crises that are equally important, but perhaps a little bit less urgent, such as climate change, which it's been hard, especially in my country, to get people to pay sustained attention to it. But perhaps this will change things. Perhaps we will realize the effects we have on the natural world, not only for the coronavirus, but for other crises. While I think we talked, Thorsten talked about disinformation. As a journalist and a former sort of daily journalist, I'm quite aware of that concern. And it's a very tricky situation in that one of the aspects of disinformation and misinformation is that by trying to correct a mistake, a lie, if you will, misinformation, you reinforce it. So we need to really have some imaginative thinking about how do you combat misinformation, because if you do what we call fact checking in this country and say, oh, Solomon says, I have a full head of hair, you know, but I don't, I would do a story saying, Solomon Passe says Eric Weiner has a full head of hair, fact check, not true. And most people who hear that will think I have a full head of hair because they hear the lie. So we need some imaginative thinking. And we also, I think, we need scientists, absolutely. We need public health officials, but I actually don't think that's enough. Science can give us the facts, but moral leadership, moral leaders give us the courage to do the difficult things. A scientist can say, the way to stop the spread of this contagion is for everyone to stay in their house with their spouses for 3 months. And that may be true, but a moral leader will say, this is difficult. Here's why you need to do it. Here's how you can endure the unendurable. So yes, listen to science, but what's going to get us through this is the kind of moral leadership that hopefully we will see, that will sustain us. So on that optimistic note, I want to thank you and turn the microphone or whatever we're using here back to Solomon.
Thank you, Eric. Actually, you have keynote participation as speaker in the concluding part of this event, so we do not, together with the journalist Konstantin Volkov, so we do not move to Q&A with you right now. But what I want to ask you, to promise to everybody here, that one day when you receive Nobel Prize for Literature, you will invite all of us for the ceremony in Stockholm.
Yes, you're invited, and in person, not by Zoom.
Thank you, wonderful. We have the first result of this conference. Now, we move to Hans van Baalen, who is president of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe party, member of the European Parliament for 10 years, 2 mandates between 2009 2019, and Dutch MP for another 10 years before that. Hans van Baalen is president of our party, member of the businessman, journalist, true leader of Europe, and co-author of Health Shield Europe, which a number of you have seen and discussed. Hans, you have the floor, please.
Yes, it's an honor to be in this panel. And I think if I correctly hear Thorsten Geisler saying that he is not a specialist. No, but nobody is in this case. Also medical doctors, I've seen from the Dutch experience, they know a lot, but they don't know everything about this virus, COVID-19. So if you put in a row what doctors, specialists, non-political persons, independent persons have said, you see very different analysis. 3 or 4 months ago, the specialist said, it's very unlikely that this virus comes to Europe and to the world. Probably it will be in Asia, it will be locked down maybe in China. Then the specialist said, well, probably it's not likely that it goes from one person to another, that's difficult. And then also the specialist said, well, for instance, it will not, the virus will not attach itself to, for instance, a shopping car. But it did. So you see that for politicians, you had to do with scientific evidence, which, well, you could doubt, not because people wanted to lie or did lie, but they simply had not all the information. It takes time to get also for specialists the information. So politicians had to take measures based on maybe 50% or less of facts. And what the politicians in most countries try to do is not to overburden the system, the health system, and not to have this peak. And therefore there was in most countries a policy of social distancing, washing your hands, etc., wearing mouth masks and face masks, etc. Only, let me say, after this crisis, we can learn what were effective measures. And so it's vital that we know, for instance, without even pinpointing our fingers at Beijing or the World Health Organization, but when did it start in Wuhan? This doctor who very early said something is happening here, and let me say the Chinese government said he is spreading false gossip, etc. This has to be looked after. What happened there? Solomon, you also pointed at Taiwan. They had learned from the SARS crisis and they took effective measures, so we can learn from them. So the most important thing is that when this crisis is gone or it's contained or we have a vaccine, that we really learn from the crisis based on objective data, what really has happened. And of course you have seen that immediately the Chinese have said, well, we accept maybe an independent investigation. However, this and should be done and not be done. Well, that is not an independent investigation. Again, we should learn from this COVID-19 crisis. A second remark is, and like Thorsten, I can say I'm not the specialist. Like many of you, we have opinions and we can ask questions. But if you look at the so-called Spanish flu in 1918, 1919, it came into 3 waves. It cost, I think, 50 million lives in a world not with 7 to 8 billion people, with many people less elderly people. So it was an immense shock. It came in 3 waves and then it was gone and nobody knows why and nobody took lessons. So this is also important to see that even with moral leadership, Eric Weiner, and I agree with you, moral leadership is important, but moral leaders, whether they're religious ones or political ones, cannot predict, does it take an extra month, an extra year? And then we have to deal with human beings. I mean, social distancing is against our feelings. It's not normal. Let's go down to earth. People get in love, and you can't get to build a relationship with 1.5 meter distancing. That doesn't work. So maybe leaders can explain that we have to wait for another month or another 2 months, but people will be people and will reach out to other people. So it's very hard where social or political or leadership can bring us. Then I would like to say something about disinformation, etc. Maybe it's interesting to know that when I was a draftee officer in the Dutch army, I was officer of psychological operations. It was not called then anymore warfare, but it meant, of course, that we from NATO, from the Dutch side, used all the tactics possible to make it difficult for the Soviets not only to intervene, but we wanted to create distance between the Polish army in the Soviet bloc and the East German army, and we looked what we could do. So a kind of psychological warfare on our part was there. It has always been there, and I consider us NATO still the good guys, no doubt about that. So people say the first victim in a war or in a crisis is truth. That's maybe true. However, it is interesting to see we have to define what is disinformation, what is fake news. For instance, you can have a discussion. I'm a friend of Ukraine. I'm against the invasion of Russia. I recognize Ukraine inside the international recognized borders. But okay, you may argue about the Crimea something. You may argue that it should be returned to Russia. I don't agree with it, but you may argue that. But about facts and figures, that's something different. I saw also that, let me say, in this kind of psychological warfare, it was claimed that Vilnius airport in Lithuania was hit by a corona outbreak. This was simply not true. This was not a fact. And that you can correct. You can do it either on the government side, you can involve journalists, etc. But to fight disinformation and fake news is extremely difficult. And through social media, it's different from the old side. I said, we have always experienced fake news, disinformation, but through social media, it spreads immensely. Also, and I will then finish because we have to enter the debate. I was at Maidan Square together with the liberal leader then in Parliament, in the European Parliament, Guy Verhofstadt, to show our solidarity, like many people have done so with the Ukrainians wanting independence, not against Russia, not having. They wanted to be free. And we were on Maidan Square to at least to say we're with you. And then appeared in all kinds of media, Verhofstadt and myself, armed with guns. The guns were a little bit too big for our hands. So if you would look at it, you would say, this is nonsense. But there were a lot of people in Belgium where Verhofstadt comes from, and even in the Netherlands, and even in our own parties who said, you were at Maidan Square with guns. I said, this is silly, this is untrue. Just look at the pictures, but people don't look right. And if they use, let me say, these devices, it's also hard to distinguish. So we have to train at schools and otherwise people to be critical on what comes to them as news from all sides. But it's extremely hard to fight fake news and disinformation. And we can only, as democracies, do it not by, let me say, copying what the other side does, but indeed go back to the facts. Where can we see facts or non-facts, and where can we be objective and say, this has not happened? And this is, I think, one of the keys to fight disinformation. Still, it will be hard. These are my remarks. Thank you very much, Solomon and dear friends.
Thank you, Hans. The first questions arrived. And they come from Mehrat Megdadi, Maxim Sedinov, Christian Vasile. They're more or less around one central topic: how to distinguish between fake news and the true news, and how to, what is the detector? What is the social media detector, or what is another detector regarding this? And another set of questions: what would be your recommendations to the European Union, to NATO, and to the UN system as a whole, including the WHO vis-a-vis the problem that we're coping with?
You ask me or others?
You.
Yeah.
This is especially with you.
Yeah, we just can't pile up everything. So we have to divide, like I told you, there has to be an independent investigation. What happened with COVID? Where did it come from? When was it first seen? By whom? What was the role of the Chinese authorities? Again, not to blame them, but just to have the simple facts from which we can learn. So this is something we representing the free world, have to demand from the World Health Organization. And this has to be done. This is concerning then COVID and where it came from and where the measures taken in all parts of the world were effective or not. If you talk about disinformation in general, I say, again, we should not counter those who come with fake news with fake news. Government agencies in democracies can establish facts, like I told you about the outbreak of corona at the Vilnius airport, which didn't happen. So the government of Lithuania can directly say this is not true, there is no outbreak of corona at Vilnius airport. I'm critical, for instance, in the European Union, there is a group of people fighting fake news. At least when I was in parliament, it were 5 to 10 people. Well, you can't fight fake news with 5 to 10 people. So you have to invest in researches, data analysis, etc. And you have to spend money for it. And again, not to fight fake news with fake news. We have to involve journalists. We as politicians can't influence journalists, but they have their own role in preventing fake news. And again, here, I said also we have to, schools, universities, NGOs, and I mean in a democratic setting, have to educate people how you can see this probably is an opinion, right or wrong, and here is fake news, where the facts are not the facts. And again, it's an ongoing uphill battle, but we have to do it.
Thank you, Hans. Even if you pretend that you're not a specialist, your proven instinct tells us that science is the key to the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now we have one more intervention coming from Taiwan. This is Quan-Ting Chen, Chief Research Officer and Deputy Spokesperson of the Mayor of Taipei. Please, my colleagues from the Atlantic Club, switch on the video with Quan-Ting Chen.
Dear, my name is Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung Chen, and I'm the Chief Research Officer and Deputy Spokesperson of Taipei City Government. I would like to begin by congratulating the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria and Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung on assembling such a diverse group of speakers to ponder over the ongoing crisis as well as our post-COVID-19 future. Our city of Taipei has worked diligently to minimize the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic from the beginning of the year. I'm proud to report that our efforts have proven to be successful. The number of confirmed cases remain low, and we halted community transmissions. As of May 18, Taiwan has gone 36 days without domestic transmission and 11 days without any new cases. On the economic front, our city is still blossoming despite a slowdown in sectors relying on tourism and mass events. I'm extremely grateful to all medical personnel and also to the people of Taipei for taking public health so seriously. Their diligence in collective efforts is what keeps our city safe and flourishing. Taipei City Government has created a comprehensive strategy for managing pandemic. There is still a single word which captures the core of all of our undertakings: transparency. Transparency is the bedrock of democratic governance. It will require our residents to dutifully partake in collective actions against the virus. We first need to ensure they trust us. Transparency and effective communication are also the most powerful weapons we can wield against the modern-day ills of disinformation and fear-mongering. In Taiwan, we also struggled with foreign and domestic forces who sought to capitalize on this crisis by spreading falsehoods. Know that facts matter. This is why Taipei City government ensure that the public stays informed about all the latest developments. Apart from regular press conferences and strengthening my social media presence, we also sought to ensure that we cater to the needs of our diverse, multilingual citizenry. Therefore, our infographics were translated into English and a number of Southeast Asian languages. Our staff also complied with a comprehensive website with all of our city's SOPs, which I encourage you all to peruse. I sincerely hope that Taipei's sister cities and old friends from around the globe can continue to benefit from our best practices. Before I conclude, allow me to congratulate Dr. Passis and Konrad-Adenauer Foundation for organizing this conference. As we say in Chinese, 海内存知己，天涯若比邻. Thank you for bringing us together and initiating this important conversation so we can better understand local and global challenges. Together, we will overcome this crisis, stay safe, and I hope we meet in Taipei soon to continue this important conversation. 加油!
Thank you, Quang-Ting Chen. Quang-Ting is a very promising young politician in Taiwan, and once his country is in WHO, I believe that he could become easily Director General of this organization. Now, I'm privileged and relieved to pass the word to Associate Professor Milena Georgieva from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, Institute for Molecular Biology, and also Laboratory for Molecular Genetics chaired by Professor Miloshev. This laboratory, in cooperation with Professor Shen in New York and the Atlantic Club and other stakeholders, is developing the genotoxic detector with the support of NATO. She's a PhD in molecular biology and also academic advisor to Enago Academy in the United States. Milena, you have the floor, and thank you very much for agreeing to moderate such a competent, highly professional audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Solomon. Thank you, Solomon, for this introduction. First, I'd like to make some technical notes for those who are watching us on the Zoom platform. So if you have any It's a great honor for me as a scientist to moderate the following 2 sessions of this tremendous event, in which, as Solomon already said, we gather renowned panelists from a diverse expertise from 3 continents, covering 14 time zones. and we share and discuss with you the best known and most successful anti-pandemic measures around the globe. So please allow me to announce the start of the second panel, which is entitled Ingenuity in Action, Best Existing Practices. This panel is also entitled by the book of Eric Weiner, like all the others, but this one is The Geography of Genius, a search for the world's most creative places, which as a scientist and a molecular biologist, I find very mind-provoking and raising interesting questions of how and why we got locked down under a tiny virus like SARS-CoV-2 in the world of modern medicine, in the era of genome studies and artificial intelligence. And as Eric Weiner said already, this is a stress test. And we believe that it is a stress test for humanity, for science, for education, for politics and economics. And it depends definitely on the genius to exit successfully with the best lessons learned. In this panel, we shall discuss some of the best anti-COVID practices coming from South Korea, USA, Israel, and Taiwan. Our first speaker is Dr. Chun Biho. And let me introduce him shortly, which is not very possible because his CV is tremendous, but shortly. Dr. Biho holds PhD in political science and sociology from the Complutense University of Madrid, Spain. He has been the ambassador of Korea and Bulgaria during the period of 2010-2013, and in awarded many prestigious awards, among which Doctor Honoris Causa from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, where I am affiliated, also Sofia University in Bulgaria. He also possesses the Red Stripes Order of Service Merit from the Republic of Korea and the Order of Águila Azteca from Mexico. Today, Dr. Biho will talk about the South Korea's response to COVID-19, stressing on the best practices from his country and how it protects its citizens from the COVID. He will address, of course, key questions of how South Korea fights against the pandemic. Please, Ambassador Biho, the floor is yours. It's my pleasure to invite you.
Thank you very much. This is my great honor and pleasure to participate in this session. Professor Dr. Milena Georgieva.
Exactly.
Well, as for the Korea's evolving response to COVID-19, let me make some explanation from the scientific and medical perspective, together with the voluntary participation from the society, as well as the leadership, political leadership by the government. Well, the COVID-19 epidemic in Korea has seen a significant slowdown in newly confirmed cases. After peaking at 909 on 29 February, it comes down to single digit on 19 April. Of course, I have to say that the figure is fluctuating. The average number of new cases per day had fallen to around 6 in the first week of May. Well, currently nearly 90% of all confirmed cases have fully recovered. Despite the encouraging trend, we have remained vigilant against the sporadic group community transmission in different parts of the country. Well, as for the Korea's evolving response to COVID-19, our response to COVID-19 has been fine-tuned to minimize the detrimental impacts on the livelihood, the economy, and our interaction with the world. Well, we have some topics, some principles, that is openness and transparency. Korean government carried out measures to the incoming travelers at different phases. Phase 1, special entry procedure and self-health check mobile application. Phase 2, mandatory COVID-19 testing of inbound travelers from higher affected regions. Phase 3, mandatory quarantine for all inbound travelers. Phase 4, 14 days self-quarantine. Phase 4, suspension of visa-free entry and visa waiver program. Phase 5, mandatory COVID-19 testing of all inbound travelers. Well, as I mentioned to you, the principle is keeping borders open, national borders open, and keeping society open through 3T, that is, test, trace, and treatment. Testing, tracing, treatment. But we have to say that in this process, the government is trying to protect and respect the privacy consideration, that is, individual privacy. Well, what is most prominent, remarkable is that we have civic voluntary engagement, that is, flattening the curve on COVID-19 epidemic in Korea has relied heavily on civic engagement, participation, and partnership with the people. The public as a whole adhered to personal hygiene measures such as wearing face masks, compiled with self-quarantine measure, and maintained social distancing. Notable example is the drive-through and walk-through screening stations. When face masks were in short supply and the series of government measures to assure even distribution fell short of public demand, again, the medical community came up with the idea of utilizing pharmacies already equipped with national database that can prevent duplicate purchases. Well, I have to mention the whole of government adaptive approach. Since 23 February, when the health alert for COVID-19 was upgraded to the highest serious level in the face of the massive outbreak in Daegu, southern province in Korea, in the face of the massive outbreak in Daegu, the Korean government has maintained a concerted whole of government approach. The Prime Minister chairs the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters meeting, comprising all relevant ministries of the central government, as well as the 17 provinces and major cities. Well, even in this process, to counterattack COVID-19, well, under the serious circumstances COVID-19, Korea held its nationwide legislative elections on 15 April as scheduled. Most pressing concern was that mass mobilization of people and resources necessary for carrying out nationwide elections may possibly spread the epidemic. Well, as for COVID-19 patients, voting by mail has been made accessible for COVID-19 patients in hospitals and community treatment centers, subjected to pre-registration 24th March to 28 March. Persons under self-quarantine is a case, close contacts of confirmed patients and recent returnees from overseas on the government-monitored self-quarantine were given a specific time window on election day to visit polling stations after voting has closed for the general public. Well, we have another issue of opening schools. Well, as a matter of fact, during the first and second months, we maintained online opening. As the academic year in Korea begins in early March, different from other countries in Europe, scheduled opening of schools was replaced by online opening rather than offline opening. The Ministry of Education worked together with the metropolitan and provincial offices of education to lend 316 digital devices to students in low-income households. Well, we have some schedule of phased opening. That is, following the decision of 3 May to transition from strength in the social distancing to distancing in everyday life, measures as of 6 May, the Ministry of Education announced the plans to open schools in 4 phases of different days, starting with the final grade of high school on 13 May, and all other grades in 3 phases starting on 20 May, 27 May, and 1st June, respectively. However, when the schools are open recently, we, the society as a whole, has some cases of confirmed COVID-19 confirmed cases by 2 or 3 students. So immediately, all the schools are closed. All the schools are closed. Well, as for the social distancing, well, social distancing measures in Korea, first introduced on 29 February, has been continually adapted and adjusted in response to the evolving COVID-19 situation at hand. Initial social distancing measures between 29 February and 21 March advised the general public to avoid gathering in groups and keep the spaces between people. Well, the left photo is online education, online teaching in the school. The right one is taking test to try to, as candidates to some government places or enterprise places. Well, as for the sharing and learning, that is call for global solidarity. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented global crisis with far-reaching impact. It has triggered widespread closing of borders, severely undermined global mobility of people and goods, disrupted the global supply and distribution network chain, and spread panic and fear. Korea has been one of the first countries to be hit by COVID-19 pandemic due to the geographical proximity to mainland China. So we are ready to share the experience and know-how we have gained with foreign governments. In the first, we are endeavoring to meet requests for humanitarian assistances, as well as to link up the domestic procedures of test kits and medical equipment with foreign governments that wish to purchase them or acquire them. In the second, we are organizing web seminars and video conferences with foreign partners and preparing fact sheets to share on a selection of COVID-19 related issues such as crisis management strategy, diagnostic and epidemiological study, treatment measures and patient management, border control and airport management, and broader policy matters such as election, education, and economic recovery. We are also actively engaging in bilateral and regional multilateral dialogues on COVID-19 with many countries. In response to COVID-19, many countries turned inward to shield themselves from the virus. We should all work together to enable essential travel of officials, medical experts, business people, urgent family visit with compelling necessity. Thank you very much to pay attention to me.
We thank you for this wonderful talk. As we can see, the butterfly effect is everywhere. So what happens in South Korea happens almost the same in Bulgaria. So we are under a complete lockdown. I'm sure that we're going to have many questions, but let's give the floor to Professor Chang Hui Shen. And then we can, after the session, we can address the questions from our audience. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce Professor Chang Hui Shen, who is a professor and chair of biology department, College of Staten Island. And he is also head of the biochemistry and biology PhD program, Graduate Center, CUNY University, New York. Professor Shen is a prominent scientist in the field of molecular genetics and biology and is a very good friend and collaborator to our lab and to the Atlantic Lab. So please, Professor Shen, share with us your thoughts and knowledge on the coronavirus genome and its possible origin, which is a topic for many conspiracies until now. And also discuss with us how the US fight against this pandemic from your scientific perspective of view. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Milena. And first of all, I want to ask Dr. Asi and also the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation to invite me to join this conference and to share my opinion on this COVID-19 pandemic. So basically today I want to discuss the world's preparedness for the pandemic and the COVID-19 disinformation during the pandemic. So as a scientist, I want to share with you how a scientist see this COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So basically, as we all know that we are facing this unprecedented public health crisis, and we see almost all countries are not prepared enough for the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a scientist, then we start thinking why the preparedness for the infectious disease is not enough. And then I think we can see this question in 4 different angles. And the combination of these 4 different factors result in the global crisis. So what are these 4 factors? So basically, number 1 would be the political leaders' response to the COVID-19. And number 2 is government's response to COVID-19. Basically, the political leaders' response to the COVID-19 will lead to the government's response to the COVID-19. And then we will see how the general public's awareness in the COVID-19, and then also the underfunded government budget excuse me, for preparing the pandemic. So for the first point, political leaders' response to the COVID-19. In the beginning of the COVID-19, politicians consider the outbreak of the COVID-19 is serious. They don't always listen to the scientists' recommendation. They only make a decision based on several reasons, including the aspect of the politics and the economy. Therefore, politicians may at some occasion provide disinformation and misinformation and mislead the general public or even other nations. And then the leaders' decision also lead to the government's slow response to the COVID-19. This is because the politicians are not well prepared to face the pandemic, and therefore they made many wrong decisions based on the disinformation. Furthermore, they don't know how to implement action plans in response to the crisis. As such, the broken healthcare system and the general public cannot help to prevent and to contain the virus. We have to know politicians' will and the proper decision is needed to protect people from the consequence of pandemic, to take action to save lives and to build a safer and more secure world. The slow response eventually led to a series of catastrophic missteps and result in many thousands of needless coronavirus cases. So here I want to show you an article just published a few days ago. Next slide, please. This is conducted by a research team in Columbia University. Next slide. So from this curve that you can see, if you look at the panel A, B, E, and F, so basically that's the national confirmed case in the United States. If you see the red dot, and A and E, that's the confirmed case. B and F, that be the days, the report days. And so you can see the red dot to show you the actual number, and then that reach the peak around the first 2 weeks of April. If you look at the panel A, and then that's the confirmed case. And then if you look at the panel B, that would be the reported days in the whole United States of America, and it's also reached the peak at around first 2 weeks of April. And then if you look at the panel C and D, that's the data from the New York City. So as you can also see that the peaks start to take off after the March 22nd, and then also reach the peak around the first 2 weeks of the April. And then the confirmed days in the panel D also reach the peak around the third week of the April. And from this, that show you the actual number. And now from the Columbia University's research, they show if the government take action 1 week early. Remember that the New York State implement the post as executive order on March 22nd, and the New York City shut down all the schools on March 15th. However, on February 21st, CDC specialists already warned that the COVID-19 could lead to the pandemic. And so in this research, they also try to use different model if the government take the action to shut down the school and close the shop. If they implement the action 1 week early on March 8th, then you can see the black curve in the panel A, B, C, D, and then you can see the number drop significantly, drop almost half. And then they further analyze the data. And then if the government take the action on March 1st, then you can see the panel E, F, G, H, the number even lower. And how do we translate this into the easy number for everyone to see? Please, next slide. So this would be the number that we should see that. So basically, this is the data from the May 3rd that you can see the reported days, 65,000 in the whole United States of America. If we take the action 1 week earlier, which would be the March 8th, then the days would be only 29,000. Then if the government take the action on March 1st, that would be the first reported confirmed case in New York. And if we take the action on March 1st, then the reported days will drop from 65,000 to 11,000. So this is just the demonstration to show you the political leaders' decision and can impact the government's response, and therefore might influence the result. And so that's why it lead to a series of catastrophic missteps and result in many thousands of needless coronavirus cases. And then the next slide, please. And then number 3, now be the, so basically this is just to show you that after the daily mobility index during the months of March and April. So basically, this is also the same research to show they use the March 1st as the base as 1. And then, as you can see, after March 15, when the New York implement the pause and shutdown, and then the mobility index dropped significantly. And that's the panel A on the left. And so during the last 2 weeks of March and the first 2 weeks of April, and we see the significant decrease of mobility in the New York. And then in the middle panel, you can see the confirmed daily case. So you can see the New York, the confirmed case taking off March 23rd. And that's when the New York State implement the post executive order, and then flatten the curve around the first 2 weeks of the April, and then start declining the confirmed daily case. And then that's how you see the mobility index start moving up. That's in the left panel. So the daily mobility index start picking up after April 12th. So these are just to show the mobility index of the New York State. And then next slide, please. And then the third factor is general public's awareness in the COVID-19. The general public, they don't realize that the virus can spread very fast, especially at the present time. Globalization not only promote the international trade, but also promote the international travel with the next slide, please. With the well-connected air, land, and sea transportation, it is very easy to travel and spread the disease. If we don't pay attention to the biological outbreak, it will lead to the disaster. So these figures just to show you that the annual international travel through the air, and so basically in 2019 there will be there was 1.75 billion of international travel, and remember the world population is only 7.5 billion, so that represents 20% of the population is traveling internationally. So therefore, it is very easy to spread the infectious disease. So give you the example, the first case in New York, that was a female health worker, and she traveled from Iran to New York City on February 25th, and then she was confirmed to the COVID-19 positive on March 1st, and she was the first case in the New York City. And so that's just to demonstrate the general public's awareness is also very important. And then the next slide, please. So then the number 4 factor, that's underfunded government budget for preparing the biological risk. In recent years, the government's investment in biological preparedness is decreasing. As a result, the health system for responding to infectious disease is broken. So for example, so next slide, please. And This is the Time magazine published on May 4th, 2017. So basically in 2017, the Time magazine already published the world is now ready to the next pandemic. And in this article, basically they discuss how the government underfund the biological preparedness. Next slide, please. So basically next slide, please. Here, just to show you that in the past 5 years, the American government decreasing their funding for the biosecurity program. So as you can see from fiscal year 2015, the funding is 2.22 billion, and then they decreased to fiscal year 2019, 1.61 billion. This represents almost, it's more than 20% of reduction of the funding. And so, and then this just to show you the underfunded government budget. And then another report, which is the Global Health Security Index report. And this report was released in October 2019. This is a joint project of the Nuclear Threat Initiative, Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security, and the Economist Intelligence Unit. So basically they perform comprehensive assessment and benchmarking of health security and the related capability across 195 countries. So I have to remind you, 195 countries does not include Taiwan. And so basically from their assessment, they try to assess a country's capability to prevent and mitigate epidemic and the pandemic. And then they found severe weakness in countries' ability to prevent, detect, and respond to a significant disease outbreak. And they also found most countries have not tested important health security capacity, and also they don't even test their emergency operation centers. And so the conclusion is no country is fully prepared to handle an epidemic or pandemic. This report was released just a few months ago. And then, so now we can see all countries, all income levels suffer from the COVID-19. And we see the country's lack of foundational health system capacity, vital for COVID-19 pandemic response, and the hospital capacity is enough, and we see a shortage of ventilator and the personal protective equipment. This is because they don't invest sufficient in biological preparedness. And then from the next slide, please. And then the only exception is the Taiwan. As you can see, several article journal already pressed the Taiwan's preparedness for this, how the Taiwan fight the COVID-19, and I'm sure that you just listened to the mayor of Taipei, and also the official from the Taipei to describe how they implement it and quickly to contain the COVID-19. And so this is just an example to show you how the successful story from the Taiwan. And then the bottom line is the global biological risks are growing in many cases faster than the health system, security system, and the scientific research. Therefore, government should invest more. And then the next slide, please. So, and then I want to just to switch the gear a little bit toward to the disinformation. So basically, I want to talk about the COVID-19 disinformation during the pandemic. And next slide, please. So we know the false and the misleading information related to the COVID-19 are significant challenges during the crisis, and it is difficult to quantify the impact that misinformation is having on effort to control COVID-19 in countries around the world. In today's context of COVID-19, the purpose can simply be to airbrush a narrative. For example, China is trying to influence how foreign media and the foreign government react to its management of the COVID-19 pandemic, and China is getting better at influence operation. That's because China is using its economic leverage in order to pressure government to change their behavior. And also, delivering aid is a common China offensive strategy, which should not be seen as negative per se. However, in the case of COVID-19, it's come as part of a wider and more sophisticated propaganda effort to spin the narrative on the virus response and seize the moment to undermine the EU and the transatlantic alliance. And China has continued to run global disinformation campaign to deflect blame from the outbreak of the pandemic and improve its international image. So, for example, very bad example. I mean, as an official, the spokesperson and the Director General of the Information Department of China's Foreign Ministry, Mr. Zhao Lijian, he speculated on Twitter that the United States was hiding early cases of COVID-19, disguising them as regular influenza. And furthermore, he also wrote that the United States military might have brought the coronavirus to Wuhan. And this was published on March 12th. And then, amazingly, that a research team in the United States from the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Illinois at the Urbana-Champaign, they found 10% of American public, they believe that the US government created the virus and the US military brought the virus to China because of that statement from the Chinese official. And on the other hand, the notion that the virus was created by the Chinese government as a bioweapon was rated probably true or definitely true by 20% of the United States population. So then now this is a very controversial question, and so then we have to ask: so is the COVID-19 virus a virus evolved from the current existing virus through natural evolution or from genetic engineered genome? And then we can ask also, where did the COVID-19 virus came from? And next slide, please. So here is just the recent publication to show you the comparison of the SARS-CoV-2, which is the COVID-19 virus genome, and the comparison compared to the SARS-CoV, which is the SARS virus, and also the coronavirus and the pangolin coronavirus. And then we can see in the first red box, I circled on a 70% similarity. And then if you look at the S protein, which is S protein on the right side, the circle, the red circle, and also you can see also almost 70% of the similarity between the SARS-CoV-2, which is the COVID-19 virus genome, and compared to the SARS-CoV and also the bad coronavirus and the pangolin virus, and S protein, which is the critical protein that can use the COVID-19 virus to attack the human cell. And then we can see it is about 70% of the similarity. And with the 30,000 base of the genome, it may be possible, because we have to realize virus mutation rate is 40 million times as fast as humans do. So with 30,000 base pair of genome, and maybe possible that 10-20% of genome have been mutated and become the COVID-19 virus. So, there's no sign of genetic engineer on the COVID-19 virus. So although there's no sign of genetic engineer on the COVID-19 virus, we cannot still rule out any possibility because it's in advanced biotechnology. So for example, the CRISPR-Cas9 technology can easily implement 5% of the sequence layer, and then that can make the virus as proteins more easily to attack the human cell. And then for the second question, so where is the origin of the COVID-19 virus? Although the Chinese government claimed the illegal wildlife trade in Wuhan seafood market and caused the outbreak, all evidence show that several of the initial COVID-19 cases had no connection of the Wuhan seafood market. Then it is very logical to consider during the proximity. So the two research institute in Wuhan might be possible the source of the outbreak. So the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention, because these two research institutes, they collect all the coronavirus from the wildlife. And it is possible by accident, just by accident, and to release the virus. And this is just speculation, and we have no proof to show the detail. So this is also because the Chinese government, the Chinese government is spin powerful narrative to deflect responsibility and disguise its accountability for the outbreak and covering up the information. And also it's not transparent. It is very difficult to make the decisive conclusion. And then the next slide, please. So basically from all what we can see, and then from the lesson that we learned, and also from the successful story, and we see. So basically, I think that in the future that the government investment on the preventing the biological risks should increase, because government should take action to address health security risk, and the political leaders should closely coordinate and track health security investment to increase the capacity. Health security capacity in every country should be transparent and regularly measured. And also we should recognize that science play a very important role in protecting public health in the face of the pandemic. And government must invest in the biological research. And also government scientific institutions should be led by experts, protected from the political influence. Therefore, the scientists, so we can create the environment in which the physicians, scientists, and the experts are free to communicate evidence-based factual information without fear of retaliation or retribution. Also, data sharing should be transparent and efficient so that we can prevent the disinformation, which can delay the response and cause the damage. And then the government emergency response. And so basically, government should improve interlock coordination among sectors so that we can improve the political system and increase government effectiveness. For example, operational link between security and the public health authority in response to high consequence biological event. And this has been proven successful in Taiwan, because they established this National Health Command Center to rapid action and transparent policy to contain the COVID-19. And also the country should also test their health security capacity on a regular basis, and also by holding a regular simulation exercise, and then to learn whether they have a functioning system, and also they currently demonstrate their response.
Professor Chen, we have run out of time, so
Yes.
I'll stop here.
Stop here.
I'll
and
stop here.
We go to the next slide.
You just gave a very good overview of what's going on in USA and what's going on in the science of coronavirus genome. So we know that we don't know almost anything. So we need this symbiosis between politicians, between physicians, and also scientists. So that's why I'm gonna forward the word to Dr. Itai Pesa, who comes from Israel, and he is currently the director of the Edmond and Lily Safras Children's Hospital at Sheba Medical Center in Israel. And he continues to work as a senior pediatric intensive care physician. He is at the borderline where humanity, empathy, disease, medicine, and science meet in a strong clash. So please, Dr. Pesa, I give you the floor of our Zoom conference just to share your thoughts about the current pandemic and why we were not prepared at all for it. Please.
So thank you very much. I want to start first by thanking the organizers for inviting me to share our experiences and our thoughts in this very distinguished panel. In the sake of time, I guess we have not so much time left. I'll try and take you through what we went through just at one medical center in Israel through this very challenging time. Israel has faced the corona pandemic slightly later than it started in many other places. The actual first case in Israel appeared at somewhere towards the end of February, somewhere at 21st or 22nd of February. And prior to that, there were no patients, but there were some suspected cases. They came from a cruise ship, the Diamond Princess. Which was a cruise ship that sailed around Japan. And there has been a group of Israelis on that ship. They were stranded on the ship and needed to be transferred somewhere into Israel. Our medical center, Sheba Medical Center, is the largest hospital in Israel, around 2,000 beds. And we were not actually prepared that we're gonna be the first to meet Corona. We knew Corona was going on. We communicated with a lot of our peers around the world, and we saw this pandemic evolving in China, later in Italy and Spain. And we understood something must be done very early on in order for us to be prepared to this wave, to this surge that is about to hit. So what the Sheba Medical Center did is actually volunteer to accept these people that were coming off the cruise ship into Sheba Medical Center, especially to be prepared to learn from the experience of handling these suspected cases. It was about 20 people, and actually using them for us to drill and to train and to be ready when the real patients actually arrive. Very early on, by discussing with our, as I said, peers around the world, we understood that the key to as a medical center, to be able to work through this surge and to actually have the capacity to treat the very large amount of patients we were expecting, was to actually change the way we think and try and figure out how to maintain a hospital. Patients still come in, not even with the COVID. This is a very major challenge, which I think we still have to handle. What happened to all the regular patients, those without COVID, during this epidemic, when in a lot of countries, the regular medical system actually was shut down. So we understood we have to maintain these two efforts. One, treating COVID patients, and the other one continuing to offer our services to the population that really needs them. So very early on, we understood that we have to change the infrastructure, or maybe prepare new infrastructure. And we did that by repurposing a lot of our areas of care, and actually areas not just prepared for care. For example, we took all our parking lots, our underground parking lots, and turned them into inpatient units. We had, as I said, some time. We had a period of about 2 weeks from the moment the people from that cruise ship arrived to Shiva until the first patients arrived. So in a very immense effort, supported by our logistic teams, we actually built what we would call an emergency hospital. This emergency hospital included tripling or quadrupling our ICU capabilities, and also enabling us to treat corona positive patients away from the areas where the non-corona patients were treated. This way, again, allowing us to maintain our effort in providing regular care parallel to our ability to treat coronavirus patients. So this actually seems very simple. Why actually shut down the hospital and bring the corona patients in if you can just build a new one? So it's very maybe easy, or not so easy, but possible to create the infrastructure. But what about the medical teams, which again was a very crucial point here. So again, we had to innovate and think outside of the box, and we developed very quickly programs that we call just-in-time training programs. This is part of our emergency preparedness protocol. Israel is a very experienced country in emergency preparedness, unfortunately. And so we are used to having to train people very, very quickly. So we created very quickly, based again on collaborations with institutions and peers around the world, training sessions to train our people in personal protective gear use, in treating ventilated patients, in triaging coronavirus patients, again, based on all the data we can get from our peers around the world. And we actually not just repurposed our infrastructure, we also repurposed some of our teams and trained them to do things they were not used to do. Again, we created different levels of care, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but the idea here was, again, to use the current knowledge and infrastructure, expand it, slightly repurpose it, and then be ready for the surge when the surge hits. Fortunately enough, in Israel, the government took very early on immediate actions of closing the skies. Israel was actually the first country to stop the flights from China, and later to actually close all incoming flights. It was one of the first countries to close schools and so on. This, of course, has a very significant impact on our economy currently, but it resulted in a very mild surge of patients, which gave us a lot of freedom, or actually we didn't need to not be able to offer the first line or the top quality of care to our patients. So no patient in Israel actually that needed critical care did not get a critical care bed, and no patient was left untreated, as happened in some areas around the world where the surge was actually too high. And this is again due to the fact that the government took very early on the precautions needed, but also that the medical teams and medical system actually prepared very well. Another point I want to touch upon is the subject of medical teams and medical team safety. I think this is one of the key elements that helped us face or meet this challenge. The fact that very early on we understood that we need to, the first line of protection needs to go to our medical teams. We saw that in Italy and in Spain, a lot of the areas that were actually most severely affected had lost a lot of their medical teams, and that actually affected the quality of care that could have been provided. So we very early on put a lot of emphasis on protecting our medical teams and channeled the protective gear to those areas. This in parallel with a very immense effort in getting proper protection gear. Again, only in the first few days did we lack some of the protective gear, but very early on the government and also the hospitals themselves did a very immense effort in getting this gear, so we didn't lack any gear. And I'm happy to say now, 2.5 months later, that at Sheba Medical Center at my hospital, no medical team member was infected by a patient when they were working in the coronavirus areas. And I think this is a crucial point. I think this, for the future, has to be one of the focal points, protecting the medical teams in a proper manner, not just to maintain them able to provide care, but also to have them feel that we are there for them and that they are protected, and so they can do their jobs, and they are not stressed by the fact that they themselves can be infected or maybe jeopardize their family. Maybe the last point I want to touch upon is innovation, because again, very early on we understood that not much is known about this virus. In fact, you talk to people around the world, you get a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts, but no real evidence. So very early on, we understood we have to use some techniques that we use when we create innovation in our center. And we teamed up with a lot of startup companies, with the industry, and with the universities, created teams, about 40 or 50 teams. Each of these teams aimed at solving one of the problems that we face when we treat corona patients. So this could be a clinical problem, creating a clinical protocol on how to treat the patients, use plasma on one patient, or use the remdesivir or the new medications on the other. This is obvious, but it can also be dealing with problems that we had, which are not just the typical clinical problems. So for example, how do the teams that work in the protective gear communicate with each other? I don't know if you understand how complex it is when you wear an N95 filtering mask and a suit and all of that to actually talk to your peers and be able to communicate with them. So we had a team that worked on that and created very innovative sort of walkie-talkies that allow the teams to communicate with one another. How do we transform BiPAP to ventilating machines in order to be ready for the surge of ventilated patients that ended up not coming in Israel, but I'm sure this is still a challenge in many other places. How do you diagnose corona rapidly? How do you use artificial intelligence in order to decide which patient needs what type of therapy and where to go? And so from day one, we had teams working on that. These teams are still working. And of course, everything that they produce is out there, and we are happy to share that with any institution or any other place, both in Israel and abroad, in order to help them when they prepare and when they face the corona surge. We're currently at the point where, again, there are very little cases, new cases in Israel. In fact, in the past 3 or 4 weeks, we didn't have any severe corona case in Israel. We only have very small number of cases, about 10 to 20 new cases a day. So we feel that the surge is past us, but we're actually now sitting together and figuring out how to prepare to the next surge. And hopefully, once we have these conclusions, we'll be very happy to share them with the institutions and governments around the world. Maybe the last thing I want to say, which I think to me is like my take-home message from this whole epidemic. I think at the end, the key word here is mutual responsibility. This is what we asked our citizens to do: to stay at home, to wear a mask, to keep on, sanitizing their hands, not to do the things not to see the people they love, not to go to sports. And this is something that each of them or each of us had to do. The same is how our medical teams stood up and were responsible and risked actually their lives and their families in order to care for other people. This is what happened with the industry that, as I said, mobilized and came through in order to help us provide better care. And I think this is what happened with our governments. And I think this mutual responsibility is, when we look at it more in a global manner, is the way that we need to go forward. This is not going to work if each of the countries of the world just takes care of itself. And I think, I'm not a politician, but when you look around, this has been missing. You know, each of our countries closed their borders, did not allow flights to go through, and there was almost no help that went from one place to another. I think we're not done yet. We don't know what's going to happen next, but we have to join forces, hold hands, and try and beat this together, and not stay or do each country what it needs for itself. And with that, I think I'm done.
Thank you very much. I touched the word mutual responsibility, which directly brings us to the third panel, where we seek solutions which will make us exit more successfully. So in search of life lessons, I will pass the word to Martina Kaiser. And first, because Professor Pant cannot give his talk due to family emergency. Second, because we need some lady in the discussion, and I'm going to leave Dr. Vardi after that. So Martina Kaiser is the Global Health Policy Advisor at the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation since 2012. She is a member of the foundation. And I will ask her briefly in 5 minutes to give an overview of the German experience in these pandemics. And after that, we're going to have a floor for broader discussions at the end of all sessions. So Martina, the floor is yours. Please give your ideas to us.
Thank you very much, Milena, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen from Berlin. Dear host of the Atlantic Club and of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation in Bulgaria, I thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this conference and to contribute to the discussion, and I promise I will keep myself short with regard to time constraints. So first, some general remarks concerning the current crisis management with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. The coronavirus crisis has been dominating the everyday life of people all over the world in unprecedented ways. And in dealing with the pandemic, governments worldwide take extraordinary measures. It's the main preoccupation of governments, scientists, and global health experts to find solutions for the fight against the coronavirus and the pandemic. And the current situation has clearly shown strength, but also weaknesses of countries' capacities to deal with the pandemic of such dimension. In particular, it unfolds the poor healthcare provisions in many countries, and the lack of preparedness with regard to health emergencies. And this applies to industrial countries as well as to emerging countries and to developing countries. The current situation has also shown that no country is able to handle the pandemic on its own. Since viruses do not stop at state borders, it's a global challenge. And more than ever, we need international cooperation and decisive action for fighting the virus and for tackling the dramatic consequences of the pandemic. And this also applies to the development of new approaches and new strategies that urgently need to be developed in order to prevent future public health emergencies of this scope. So the question of this panel is, what can we learn from the current crisis and how can we be better prepared for future health crises? In my short input, I would like to address the question what the European Union might have learned from the crisis by concentrating on the latest French-German initiative for the European recovery from the coronavirus crisis. The debate about lessons learned from the corona crisis is in full swing, and often the focus lays on successful actions that national states have taken in order to manage the crisis, and that in consequence could serve as best practice examples for other countries and for future health emergencies. But besides the pressing crisis management, many countries are already engaged with analyzing their domestic capacities and response systems to health emergencies in order to adapt and in order to be better prepared for future challenges. Within the European Union, the European Commission was asked to develop a European response to the current crisis And due to the strong interconnections of the European economies, a common response is absolutely necessary. So the plans of the European Commissions are to present it by Wednesday next week, but already on this Monday, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron have presented a French-German initiative for the European recovery from the coronavirus crisis. And this initiative does not only provide concrete ideas how to tackle the corona crisis and its negative impacts on the EU or at EU level. It is also a strong political message and a commitment towards European solidarity. So the initiative aims to cushion the economic impacts of the pandemic for the European economies by means of a 500 billion euro recovery fund that is financed by the common European budget. Among plans for the reconstruction of the European economies after the crisis, the initiative also proposes the development of strategic health sovereignty and a strategically positioned European healthcare industry. In detail, Germany and France propose, among others, to increase European capacities on research and development for vaccines and treatments, with a short-term goal to develop and produce a coronavirus vaccine within the European Union and make it globally feasible. They also want to establish common strategic stocks of medicines and medical products and encourage production capacities of these products in the European Union. They furthermore intend to set up an EU health task force within the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and mandate it together with national health institutions to develop prevention and reaction plans against future epidemics. And finally, they want to establish common European standards for health data interoperability. This initiative is to be welcomed since the proposal comprises concrete ideas how to strengthen European healthcare capacities over the long term and shows the will to learn from the current situation. It is furthermore the first common initiative from France and Germany for years that aims to hold the European Union together. And it demonstrates the act or the will to act in solidarity, which has repeatedly been questioned by critics, but which is the only way out of the crisis. So now we have to wait for the concept of the European Commission and also for the counter proposal of the opponents of the French-German initiatives that are already arguing. I think the French-German initiative demonstrates, or this example demonstrates, that in a globalized and interconnected world, we need sustainable solutions in the framework of international cooperation in order to tackle the pandemic, this pandemic and also future pandemics. This applies to the implementation of mechanisms that support countries that are faced with health emergencies, and this applies to the establishment and strengthening of healthcare systems worldwide. And it also means to strengthen international organizations like the WHO, who coordinate global actions in the fight against the crisis. We also need to strengthen international solidarity, in particular with regard to the poorest countries who are not able to tackle the impacts of the pandemic by themselves. This also means to make vaccines and drugs against COVID-19 globally feasible. And in this context, finally, I would like to point to the guiding principle of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, leave no one behind. With the adoption of the 2030 Agenda in 2015, all member states of the United States have committed themselves to follow this principle. And I think it's now time to keep this promise, because it's crucial to avoid that this crisis escalates to a crisis of solidarity. Thanks. I need your micro.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for keeping in time and for sharing this interesting information with us. I will pass the floor to the next panel, which is Geography of Bliss, and the moderator will be Mr. Boku, who is a renowned journalist. So he has the honor to make the concluding remarks, and after that we're going to have some discussions. To all my panelists, thank you very much for everything that you shared with us. I think that together we can do better. So we jump on the next panel. Thank you.
Hello, how are you? I hope that you hear me. Is it okay? Okay, so it's perfect. So it is really an honor, because across 3 continents, 14 time zones, if I mention this correctly, and so many interesting guests. And I believe none of you was favoring the Swedish model and anti-lockdown models. So probably I can say just a few words about this. Unfortunately, this is a Zoom event, not an analog one, and I really hope that Mr. Passy and all the other from the Konrad-Adenauer, they will create similar events, analog ones, in the near future. So I have to admit just few things, probably for not more than a minute, because I think it's a fair thing to say, that actually this is my first Zoom call. I know that you cannot believe this, but this is my first Zoom call, because during the lockdown, during the isolation, I went to work every single day, and I made, I think, probably more than 45 interviews and on the radio, and all of them were not on the phone, but with people participating live in the studio. So I'm not sure if this is a good idea for Mr. Passy to invite me to this to this panel, but in a way, yes. In a way, I investigated. I tried to dig deeply into the coronavirus crisis. I investigated thoroughly the Swedish model. I went to 2 of the hot zones in Bulgaria several times. I went to Vidin Hospital. This is a Bulgarian city on the coast of river Danube. And the hospital there was one of the so-called most famous Bulgarian hospitals during the coronavirus crisis, because around 12 to 13% of the doctors there were infected. So I went there to their COVID unit. I went there 2 times, and I stayed for a day inside the units for interviewing the doctors and making photo reportages. Then I went 3 times to the biggest COVID-19 unit in Sofia, Bulgaria, the capital, to Pirogov Hospital. So based on my conclusions, I have few questions to our distinguished guest today, Mr. Eric Weiner, the author of Geography of Bliss, who I met, I think, last year, not in a Zoom call, but person to person, to Mr. Yossi Vardi, the investor and entrepreneur, and to my dear friend, Mr. Solomon Passy. So, dear sirs, those 2-3 months have been quite revealing for me. Actually, as every single person, I had my heroes during the years, my role models, and I have to admit that I'm a little bit ashamed by some of them, by the way they acted during the lockdown, because they were trapped in fear. I expected from some of them to be smart and not to lock down themselves so completely, to lock down their kids, for not allowing them to go out for 3 months. I cannot imagine the effect on their mental health. So my first question is to Mr. Weiner, why some of us, actually most of us, were so scared of the coronavirus? I don't mean to suggest that there aren't any rational reasons to be concerned, but why that fear from otherwise intelligent, smart people, that panic fear?
Thank you, Konstantin. It's a good question. I think the fear of takes place on several levels, and they're all very deep. I think this fear of contagion disease is something that's really hardwired into our reptilian brains, you know, the part of our brain that's very ancient. It is, you know, we always fear dirtiness and contamination. And you see lots of cultures around the world, like in India, for instance, where there's a whole caste of people who only, the untouchables, which is being phased out, who only deal with dirty chores, cleaning up dirty chores. So I think we have this hardwired fear of contamination and dirt, and we have a fear of something that's invisible, right? You can't see the virus. So it's like these horror movies that maybe you've seen, where that you don't see the monster, but it's always out there. And so I think that is part of it, this fear of the invisible, this deep-seated fear of contamination, of disease, really. And the fear, probably the biggest factor, I think, is the fear of the unknown, that, as we've heard from the distinguished scientists and medical doctors here, there's so much we don't know about this disease, and we're still learning about it. We're still learning about the effects on the body. And people look to science and medicine in particular for comfort. And when you hear doctors, like people on this panel, saying, we don't know how this virus, exactly how it transmitted, or the pathology, the effect it has on the body, that's frightening to people, the unknown of the disease. So I think we retreat to our old selves. You know, there's this whole field of evolutionary psychology that says that so much of what we do has a basis in how we evolved, and we possess what's called the negativity bias, which is basically we pay more attention to threats than we do to the good things in life. And this served us well when there was a tiger or a lion that might eat us, and so if we heard a noise, we jump and we run away. But it can cripple us too, and I think that's what you're suggesting in your question, Konstantin, is I'll say an irrational fear. I don't really like that term, because there's a reason for our fear. It doesn't come from nowhere. But let's say an exaggerated fear of anything can have more negative effects than not listening to the fear. In other words, fear can cripple itself, can cause a problem, and a little bit of fear is good. A lot of fear is bad.
Don't you think that part of the reason for that fear, apart from everything that you mentioned, is that the coronavirus has struck a powerful chord from a deep sense of guilt that many of us feel over the way humanity is acting today? I mean, from namely the globalization, the mass migration, the independence, all those things that they were already provoking intense trouble to our inner world.
Wow, that's a good question. Are we experiencing corona guilt in a way? That, you know, I've been thinking about, we're talking about really the role of nature, you know, and the earth. And maybe you're familiar with the Gaia theory, which is the theory that, that earth is a living organism. The earth itself is a living organism. And some philosophers and theorists believe that, in a way, and this may sound weird, but stay with me, we are the virus. There's almost 8 billion of us. And like a virus, we multiply. And we spread, and we cause trouble to this organism. If you believe the earth is an organism, and I think you could argue it is, that we cause trouble for the organism, the earth, and that perhaps, you know, and this is sort of veering into religious beliefs, this is spiritual beliefs at least, that events like the coronavirus are the way, Earth's way of shaking off the fleas that we are. I think we, even people who don't buy all those theories, do sense that we have been, you know, it's like the ancient Greek myths, you know, we've been messing with the gods, you know, we've been messing with nature. And we have an expression here, and I'll translate it into football terms for the international audience, that nature always has the last shot at goal, the last penalty kick, you know? that as powerful as we are and as technologically advanced as we are still part of nature, and nature gets the last word. And so I do think you're right that people are feeling, whoa, that climate change especially, that we have been tampering with our natural environment, and perhaps the natural environment through the pandemic and other ways is reminding us of that we're part of this web of life.
Do you think that because of the absence of any discussion on lockdowns and even social distancing, there are so many new reports coming out every day that lockdowns, I mean full lockdowns, are not so effective apart from smart lockdowns. Do you think that the people next time, if a novel coronavirus or any kind of virus appears, will be skeptical and won't listen to their governments?
Well, you could argue the opposite, that they might be more scared, and the first time there's an outbreak, they will lock down. I think it's a strange situation. We heard from the doctor from Israel and actually from Dr. Shen also, about how if we had taken action earlier, especially in my country, which is going through a terrible time, I have to say, here in the US, if we had taken action earlier, we would have saved many, many lives, locked down earlier. But then you're asking people, right? You say that there's going to be a fire in your neighborhood. The fire's not there yet. You can't see the fire. And you say, well, can you show me evidence of the fire? No, but it's there. And if we don't shut everything down, your town is going to be consumed by a fire. And then you shut the town down and there's no fire. And people might have two reactions. They might be like, oh, good thing we took early action, or because there's a cost to the shutdown, right? There's a huge economic cost, there's a social cost, there's a psychological cost. You shut down, and in fact, it works. And you know it works because nothing happens. And people might say, why did we do that? There was no fire. So you're asking people to have an awful lot of faith in the scientists and in their governments. And that's one thing I've seen in my research, again, is that trust in general is hugely important to national happiness, and I think to national resilience during crises like this. Like, researchers ask a simple question. They can ask people here now. Overall, most people can be trusted. That's a statement. Overall, most people can be trusted. Now, do you agree or disagree with that statement? Okay. And where countries where a majority of people agree most people can be trusted, those are the countries like Germany, like Korea, I think, where they're going to be willing to engage in what I call shared suffering and to endure the lockdown. And countries, frankly, like mine, where we don't trust each other and don't trust the government as much, we're not going to listen to their advice.
I have a question to Mr. Yossi Vardi, probably a little bit a personal one, but Mr. Vardi, did you revise your friends during the coronavirus isolation? I mean, I talked to few of my close friends, and all of us, we revised in a way our friends based on the way they behaved during those 2 to 3 months.
I don't think that I will go so far as revising my friends, but if we talk about friendships, and it also relates to your absence from Zoom, I think that the Corona experience and the lockdown educated all of us on the modalities of friendships, because I think that Zoom played a major role providing or nourishing the persona of people in communication with other people, because for 6, 7, 8 weeks you couldn't meet physically your friends, and this create a big lacuna usually, and Zoom and the other online tools, I think, played a major role. Without them, it would have been a much worse situation.
One more question. Yes, you're right about Zoom. why do you think that even after that coronavirus, let's talk about the very popular example of traffic accidents, which kill about 1.2 million people every year. Yet it seems that those traffic accidents have little impact on people's behavior, either good and bad. Why is this? Always this will be the same. And about novel viruses, suddenly everything changes.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, I'm coming from Israel. Saddam Hussein in 1990 attacked Israel with missiles. From all these missiles, not from the missiles, but 4 people were killed, and they were killed by administrating to themselves atropine, which they shouldn't do, not from the missiles. And yet, the corona, the missiles of Saddam Hussein created much bigger fear than the traffic accidents. And the traffic accidents, it's part of life. People are taking it implicitly as part of the life, as part of the taxation on life, on society. The corona was a whole new creature, you know, like an animal, wild animal running free in the streets. This has to do with psychology, with the psychology of people, I guess. And also regarding traffic, I think that you have some kind of feeling that to a certain extent it's under your responsibility. You know, if you are very careful, you reduce it. You cannot avoid it because somebody who is not careful can hit you.
I have one question. Is it possible to, I have one question apart from traffic accidents, which I think it's important. And I want to ask the 3 of you, Mr. Passi, you, Mr. Vardi, and Mr. Weiner. My question is the following. If it depends on you, if you are the chief of staff, a president of a country, if it depends on you, would you close schools during that coronavirus? Would you or not? Because my personal answer is no. I would let them open. So what's your personal, if it depends on you?
Should I start? This relates to the former panel and what are the life lessons from the corona. I think that the world is now very much engaged in developing vaccine and medical and drugs, etc. But what is very interesting in the corona that we actually don't know until today what are the mechanisms of catching the disease, what are the groups which are more susceptible to it. We see in Israel that certain demographics get 800 sick people per 100,000, another demographic get 120 per 100,000. The differences within the same countries are huge, of people with different religions, different ethnicity, and also the mechanism, the Swedish experience vis-a-vis the Taiwan experience. We have to study this thing. We don't know if it has to do with genes, with food, with behavior, with temperature, with if you live in the 1st floor or in the 9th floor, if you go in elevators, the amount of interaction with other people, we don't know. And one of the things is, speaking about international collaboration, we have to catch the data before it evaporates. Data is evaporating. If you don't get it now, you will not be able to access it in a year. We have to understand how people got the disease, what kind of people, etc. Now, when we have more data, we will be able to make these decisions.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear Mr. Solomon Passy. I believe your answer is schools will be open. Okay. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Okay.
Until we understand, we cannot take too much risk. We have to understand. Okay. This is number one. And then you can open school, you can open restaurant, you can open wherever in a designed way, not just randomly as we do it today.
Mr. Solomon Passy?
You asked about the traffic accidents, and I very much agree that this is a painful problem. And why we have so many traffic accidents? Because the regulations on the road are extremely liberal. I would say they're deadly liberal. And you can compare the regulations on the road with the regulations in the air. The air transportation is the safest transportation we have ever had on the planet. Why? Because we watch National Geographic investigation of airplane accidents. And you know that as soon as an accident occurs, the aviation authorities are taking measures, this accident not to be repeated, which is not the case with our traffic on the road. So if our road traffic is much more, so to say, disciplined and militarized, we would have much less traffic accidents. And speaking about why coronavirus is so much projected in the media and not that much, not as much as the traffic accidents. There is one simple statistics which says that many more people die from coconuts which are falling on their heads than people who were bitten by sharks. And why we have reports on the news about people who were eaten by the sharks? Because it is dramatic. And to be killed from a coconut, it is not dramatic. From being eaten by a shark, you can make the movie Jaws. And from a coconut falling on your head, you cannot make a big movie.
Yes, we as men, if we have to choose how to die, we will definitely choose the shark way, not the coconut way.
It depends what is faster.
Mr. Weiner.
Here are my thoughts. I'll answer your question directly, shortly, and then a bit longer. The short answer is I would close the schools, but maybe not for the reasons you think, because I've got a 15-year-old daughter who's in the other room sleeping, and she's been home from school for 2 or 3 months, and it's not easy. It's really difficult. They are trying to teach remotely, and they're trying to convince her and the parents that the education she's receiving online is just different. It's not better or worse than in school, but that's a lie. It is worse, right? It is not the same as being in person. She is not getting that kind of education she would in person. So why would I close the schools? Because who does this virus affect? It does not affect children for the most part, a few exceptions. It affects the elderly. And that's why I think the coronavirus is a particular stress test on not only our societies, but on our morality in a way, because it forces us, if it affected children, it would be simple, close the schools, close everything, protect our children. It affects the elderly. How much do we value the lives of elderly? How much do we value the lives of anyone? And by closing the schools, you're actually sending a message. You're teaching a lesson to all the students who are at home, saying, you're home, even though this virus probably won't affect you or your friends, because it might affect your grandparents or your friends' grandparents, and they might die. And so by closing the schools, you're, as a society, saying to children, we value every life. And that's a thing that we say it quickly and easily. We can't put a price tag on life. We put a price tag on life all the time, as Solomon was suggesting with car accidents, you know, when we have lax laws on the road, we put a price tag on life, but the coronavirus is forcing us to ask, what is that price? How much is a single life worth? how much are we willing to inconvenience a lot of people to save the life of one person?
I have one final question to the three of you, and it's, can you say just one good thing that happened to you during the lockdown, and it was revelation, either for your character, for your inner thoughts, for your family, for your close ones, just one revelation that happened to you during that 2 to 3 months period?
Should I start?
Yes.
Okay. I've been, like everyone on a personal level, inconvenienced at the very least by this, and experiencing what I call the pandemic of disappointments. Trips I was supposed to take. I'm a traveler by nature. I'm grounded. I can't take trips. Publication of my book in the US has been delayed. And I was feeling depressed one day, and I said to my daughter, I'm upset. And she said, well, why? And I said, because now everything's not under my control. And she looked at me and said, was it ever under your control? And sometimes children can be wise, right? and that is the lesson that I try to keep. And the lesson the virus has taught me is, we think we're under control of our lives. We arrange conferences, analog conferences, meetings. We have all these plans, and all of a sudden they're overturned. And it is very humbling. And so I've tried to keep that lesson in mind, that we are not in control nearly as much as we think we are. We can control our emotional, our reactions, what we do, but we don't control events, despite the latest iPhone 11 in our back pocket.
Mr. Vardi, Dr. Vardi?
I can give you a list, I'm ashamed to say, but every morning I wish the lockdown will continue. For the first time in years, I'm sleeping at the same time zone already 2 months. I'm sleeping on my bed for 2 months, not on an airplane seats. I'm eating at home. I lost 12 kilos. I do 3 times a day exercise. I don't have my to-do list in the morning, which is haunting me all of the day. I found life is beautiful.
Great, perfect. And Mr. Pasi, your final words.
I was impressed to see how huge is the patience of my wife to live with me at home for such a long, locked with me at home. I know that I'm very difficult cohabitant. And I learned much more about my children. And if you permit me, one final question to Yossi Vardi, coming from the startup nation. Does he believe that we shall be transformed into a startup planet after the coronavirus?
If we start what?
Startup planet.
To start a planet?
Start up. You're coming from the startup nation.
Yes, startup planet, yes.
Yeah.
Professor Pesach said it when he spoke. What we saw that the coronavirus created a spike of collaboration and a spike of innovation. It came from the grassroots. This was the most beautiful thing. All over the world, you saw people from the grassroots kind of coming together in order to solve a problem that they saw it's a very important problem for their nation, for the country, etc. Lot of collaboration. You can go and find today on the web free designs of ventilators which young people created. It showed again the power of the wisdom of the crowd. It showed again the power of the open innovation. Having said that, there is one big problem that I don't think that we hear enough voices about, like every big opportunity, at least in the last 60, 70 years, it makes the strong stronger and the weak weaker. I read yesterday that in the world, 60 million people will get into poverty. I think this is an optimistic assumption. I think that the kids we saw, I'm involved in some schools, we see that the kids, the weak kids are losing on the remote education. The remote education is good for sophisticated kids which have the skills to work with computer and to learn. It may be a startup planet, but as with the whole startup industry, it's the privilege of the few. It's not the privilege of the masses, and this is a big problem, which is much bigger than the corona. The corona is painting it in stronger colors, and the people, the weak people in all the countries were thrown under the bus with the closure, because you can work from home if you are a computer engineer, but if you clean offices, it's very hard to do it by Zoom. And these people, in many cases, lost their income, lost their dignity, lost their hope, lost their ability to buy food or to buy drugs or to care for their kids. This is a very big problem, and I don't hear enough discussion of it.
Thank you, Yossi. And if you don't mind, I would ask Thorsten Geisler, Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, Bulgaria, for some closing remarks. Kosher, is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much, Solomon. First of all, my big thanks to each of you, to each of the panelists. I think we shared some information, some opinion, and we benefited from it. My conclusion is, well, it is easy from today's point of information to criticize measures that were taken 2 months ago. 2 months ago, nobody did know anything about the virus. And so, well, if everybody had known everything about the virus 2 months ago, nobody would ever have made a mistake. And it's unfair to blame people for decisions that were taken 2 months ago from today's level of information. Italy had bad luck. It was the first country in Europe that suffered. And maybe they made mistakes, but these mistakes couldn't have been avoided. They didn't know anything about the virus. And this is why they deserve our solidarity. I think we're now victims of the prevention paradox. In fact, we have been quite successful. The death toll in some countries is low. And so now people are asking, they seem to be disappointed. Why do so few people die? Why the intensive care units in hospitals, why are they so empty? And they ask the questions, were all these measures necessary? My answer is yes, they were necessary. If they had not been taken, the death toll would now be much higher and more people would have died and more people would have suffered. I was actually quite happy during the last months to live in Bulgaria. I think the government reacted quickly, the measures were sharp, and they showed a positive effect. We in Bulgaria now have one of the lowest death tolls in Europe, the lowest number of victims. And so I think these measures were draconic. We all didn't enjoy life very much during the last 2 months, but the record is a very impressive one. And Sweden was mentioned. Well, Sweden has the highest death toll in Europe, more than 3 times higher than Germany's. Germany has 8,000 deaths so far. And I cannot, well, every life matters. So we should value every life. And we shouldn't say, well, it's only the old and the vulnerable that die. That would lead to dramatic conclusions. We could start thinking about whether we should still offer people above a certain age intensive care in hospitals. So let me sum up. Well, when we analyze at the end of the crisis whether mistakes were made, for sure, a lot of mistakes were made. But first, we must be fair. We must always look what information did we have access to when the decisions were taken? And second, what are we willing to sacrifice? It is always a balance, but we shouldn't sacrifice lives of some people so that just the rest of us can still have some fun. I would consider that to be very cynic. So let me thank you, but of course I respect other opinions. Solomon, a big thank you to you. It was your initiative, your idea, and you managed to commit all these great people that joined us today. And so I think you deserve a virtual hand from all of us.
If I'm not mistaken, Hans van Balen is raising a hand.
A very quick remark, and also thank you for organizing this Zoom conference. In the Netherlands, we have had 5,000 people killed because of COVID-19. And we have a country of 17 million people. The qualified doctors say that because the normal healthcare has been disrupted, we could face maybe 10 or 20,000 people killed because they didn't get their chemotherapy, their heart therapy, etc. I do not say that we should not have taken all those measures. I don't say this. But we have to learn from all the data, from all what we have experienced after this crisis. Whether a total lockdown was good, whether a partial lockdown was okay, whether some countries like Taiwan who had no lockdown were okay. So we have to learn. This is the basic thing. We cannot go after this crisis to normal. And this Zoom conference, I think, has helped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans. Well, I do not see any other hands raised, and we are exactly 1 hour after the schedule, which means that this is the good moment to say goodbye. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody from the United States, from Europe, from Israel, from Asia. Thank you very much for your great participation. Thank you, Konrad-Adenauer, and see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.